Get free tech advice for your business from O2 Gurus. Search O2 Business for more. Hey guys, welcome to BTech. It's Basil here comparing the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus with a Huawei P8. The P8 is Huawei's latest flagship, announced a few weeks ago. We had major issues with this when we reviewed it. Why? Well, it had this knuckle thing that you couldn't switch off, but now you can. Ultimately, this is a very, very cool phone now. It wasn't when it launched, but how does it stack up against the Sony Xperia Z3, the next flagship from the Japanese tech giant? Well, to start off with, let's talk a bit about the design. These are two slender phones with metal bodies, 6.4 millimeters versus 6.9 millimeters. You may think, ooh, Huawei wins, but Sony has something that Huawei doesn't, and that's waterproofing. 5.2-inch displays on both. You can see they pack similar surface areas head on. Sony also has front-facing stereo speakers. We're guessing the Xperia Z3 Plus, though, will come in at a fair bit more money than the Huawei P8. If we take a look around the fronts of the phones, you can see 5 megapixel camera on the front with a 25mm wide angle versus an 8 megapixel front-facing camera. You have screens, and that's about it. You do, like I said, have those front-facing stereo speakers above and below the screen on the Xperia Z3. To the right-hand side of the Z3, you have a power button, volume rocker, and a camera button as well. Two-stage camera button, which fires up the camera for a very, very nice and quick launching. You can also see down at the base you've got a micro USB connector, and that is exposed. An exposed micro USB connector means no flaps. This is waterproof, which is sweet, nano coated. Lanyard connector, nothing for the left hand side aside from a flap underneath which sits a tray which you can house a nano SIM card and a micro SD card. Up at the top, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and you've got a 20.7 megapixel rear facing camera. Plonking that down and talking you around the Huawei P8, you can see on the right hand side they've taken a cue from Sony. You've got a very, very standout power button. In fact, the whole thing has taken a cue from Sony. It's pretty unabashedly done so, but I really am quite happy that they have, because it looks really, really neat. It's very, very classical, very, very clean. Not as stylistic as Sony devices or indeed the Huawei P7 and before it, but it still feels like an expensive phone. You can see you've also got a volume rocker as well as that power button and two trays. Those trays are for a micro SD card and a nano SIM card slot. In certain regions it will be dual SIM. Down at the base you've got a single speaker. You've also got a grill underneath which probably sits the microphone, and you have a micro USB connector. Left hand side, no buttons. Up at the top is the 3.5mm headphone jack, and you've got a rear facing camera with optical image stabilization and a dual flash as well. It's a very, very good looking device, as is the Xperia Z3 Plus. Z3 Plus, known as, well, the Z4 in Japan really, is a bit richer feeling device. The glass back makes it feel a little bit lighter, a little bit less kind of like, well, clammy. The metal gets quite clammy on here, and it also feels very, very rich around the sides too. But ultimately, two very, very premium looking and feeling phones. As far as the screens go, you have full HD 5.2-inch panels on both, so that gives it the exact same pixel density, both IPS displays as well. The Sony Xperia Z3 looks brighter, Z3 Plus even looks brighter from this angle, and I'm gonna whack it up to full brightness, whack them both up, and depending on how much they throw the camera off, it should illustrate which is the brighter of the two panels, and indeed this is full brightness. So yeah, the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus screen is definitely brighter. If it's anything like the Z4 tablet screen, it's going to be 500 candelas in brightness, which is very, very good and bright, which suggests outdoor viewability on the Z3 Plus will be a little bit better. What you end up with though is, if you have mediocre to good lighting, you will get a very similar experience across both. Both look very nice and saturated, very punchy. Sony's always been ace insofar as you've been able to customize your display pretty extensively through the settings as well, customizing white balance and a few other things, and indeed you can do exactly that here. As far as Huawei goes, don't think you can customize your white balance as particularly, but you definitely can do something similar. You can control the color temperature, so the warmth and the coolness of the display, but it's not specific color control. Ultimately though, again, two very customizable displays, Sony wins out ever so slightly because of that brightness right there. If we were to take a look at the user interfaces, If you'd asked me a week ago, Sony would have wiped the floor with Huawei. Since then, Huawei's stopped this technology where you can take a screenshot with your knuckle, killing the user experience. If you haven't seen my full review of this, when I swiped my thumb on it, when I played games on it, it would take screenshots left, right, and center, and ultimately made the whole phone just, well, die for me. Sony's obviously doesn't have that. Sony's user interface is very classical. You've got home screens, you've got an applications tray, which Emotion UI on the Huawei doesn't have, and you've got a pull down toggle, which is stock Lollipop. It's Android 5.0.2. You have 5.0 on the Ascend P8. No applications tray, just home screen with folders and shortcuts as well as widgets. You've got a pull down notification tray that you can pull down a couple of ways. You can either swipe down from the top, or you can have this button right here, which is perfect for people with smaller hands. You can also access quick toggles too. This is far less stock, and to be honest, I actually do prefer Sony's take on it, or more to the point, Google's. What Sony has also done is given us the ability to do what Huawei has done and customize our quick toggles, which is pretty sweet. Huawei's iOS this whole thing out, so if I pull down, I've got this kind of universal search, or spotlight search as Apple calls it. Ultimately though, now that knuckle technology has been sorted out, this has become an instantly better operating system than it was before. Again, maybe not quite as polished as Sony's UI. Sony's UI now allows for landscape home screen orientation, which is awesome, but it's still a very enjoyable experience now that the knuckle tech has been fixed. As far as the cameras go, you've got a 20.7 megapixel sensor with digital image stabilization on the Xperia Z3 Plus. We've seen the sensor before, and well, we're not too excited about it, to be honest, but you never know. When we do get this in for review, it may well surprise us with some new image quality enhancements. Ultimately though, Huawei's camera on its P8 really did impress me as well, because it has optical image stabilization, 6-axis optical image stabilization, I think. You've also got an RGBW sensor and a nice wide open aperture, so what you end up with is a very good image 9 times out of 10. And what's even better about it is that it doesn't cost the earth. You've also got light painting, so you can emulate manual controls by keeping the shutters open for a fair bit of time. And ultimately, it's an impressive camera across the board. Full HD video looks really good too, even if the sound recorded from it isn't mind-blowing. Really looking forward to getting the Sony Xperia Z3 in so that we can say whether it's as good as the Z3 or heaps better. Hopefully it will be the latter, but I'm not entirely confident it will. If we take a look at the specs inside these things, you've got a Snapdragon 810 processor with 3 gig of RAM versus a Kirin octa-core processor with 3 gig of RAM as well. Now that octa-core processor in here is comprised of a Kirin 930 and a 935, 2 quad-core processors. In addition, you've also got 16 gig of memory on the Huawei P8, expandable by micro SD card. If I was to jump inside, you can see I've used up most of my memory, so any gamers out there is a 32 gig option. You'll probably want to opt for that. The Sony Xperia Z3 Plus is going to be available in a 32 gig option too. Huzzah, really happy about that. The Z3, one of the main criticisms was that it ran out of memory too quickly, especially if you loaded loads of games on here. Both of these devices pack LTE up to Cat 6 here in the UK, and currently that's only available on EE. You've also got Wi-Fi, 3G, GPS, all the other standard connectivity features you'd expect, and NFC on both as well. As far as the batteries go, you've got a 2900 milliamp cell versus a 2680 milliamp cell. Really wasn't massively impressed with the Huawei battery life. The Huawei P8 lasted a day tops with heavy use. The Sony Xperia phones have all tended to run really well battery wise, but the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus has a smaller battery than the Z3, which had a smaller battery than the Z2. So I'm not filled with as much kind of excitement about getting this in terms of battery. What I will say though is that the Sony Xperia Z3 lasted a comfortable kind of 2 days, 1.5 to 2 days. So, and that's with medium to moderate use. So that should still mean this lasts at least a day. Given the screen size is very similar to the P8 and the battery capacity is so much larger, again, it does bode well. Hopefully you enjoyed our hands-on comparison. If you have, click that like button. If you like VTech in general, click subscribe. That is how you're going to stay on top of everything that we do. Thanks for watching.